Between 100,000 and 200,000 people listened to a chat between a man in the US and a woman here in Germany on Thursday evening. So we'll dedicate this Berlin briefing episode to the conversation between Elon Musk and the AfD's Alice Weidel. And to break down that conversation, we'll be listening into some of the bits from the conversation, and I have two great guests here with me who will help me do that. So Michaela Kufner, our very own DW's chief political editor, and we also have Kate Conger over in the States. So thank you very much, Kate, for joining us. You've also listened to Elon Musk's conversation with Alice Weidel, who is, of course, the chairperson of the AfD, and Kate has written a book, Character Limit, How Elon Musk Destroyed Twitter. So she knows a lot about the man who's wearing so many hats in terms of business leader, also a very strong media figure, and a very important political advisor to the next US president, Donald Trump. So let's get started straight away with a bit of context, of course. Why did Elon Musk do this? This did cause quite a stir here in Germany before the conversation even happened. So many people questioning, why is Elon Musk suddenly so interested in German politics? He started by tweeting a couple of weeks ago, only the AfD can save Germany. And this is, of course, a party that is far right. It is in parts considered officially right-wing extremists. People did get interested as well when Elon Musk said that Olaf Scholz, the current German chancellor, is not fit for office and that he is a fool. Elon Musk then continued lashing out against the German president. Frank-Walter Steinmeier said that he was an undemocratic tyrant. So this is something where I would first up like to get a reaction from you, Kate. Why is Elon Musk suddenly so interested in German politics?
I think something that's really important to understand about the way Elon Musk views the world is it is almost entirely through the lens of X itself. So everything that he sees on X, that's where he gets all of his information. That's where he spends a lot of his time, and it really shapes his worldview. So he was turned on to the AfD through a social media influencer on X who was praising that party, and very quickly sort of glommed onto it and started saying that it was the only solution for Germany. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with his personal politics as well. We've seen him move increasingly to the right over the last year in particular.
And let's get straight to the talk between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel. If I can get your first reaction, how did he do in your eyes?
This is actually, I think, a more practiced interview than we've seen Musk do in the past. He hosted President-elect Donald Trump on X Spaces a while ago, and that talk was plagued by glitches. They had about 45 minutes of dead air before they were able to get it started. And then it was this very long, sort of rambly, freewheeling conversation. And this time Musk seemed a little bit more prepared, had a little bit more questions that he seemed to have lined up and thought through prior to this interview. So that was an interesting shift to see. It was much more of a conversational and almost friendly chat when he had Trump on a while back.
And Michaela, what was your impression? What was in it for Alice Weidel, and how did she do you think?
Well, there was a lot in it for her in terms of how many people she was able to reach and just the kind of international press that she's gotten. But I think we also pretty quickly realized that Elon Musk really doesn't care about German politics at all. He got Alice Weidel's name wrong. He called her Alice Weidel to begin with. And he really was asking her open questions, what the AfD is all about. So this clearly has to also be seen in the context of his attacks on Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. Britain is no longer in the EU. Nonetheless, he clearly is interested in throwing some doubt into how the leaders here in Europe are conducting their political business, particularly when it's somewhat related to emotive issues. That was on child abuse. It was related to foreigners. This is kind of something that he likes to push as a narrative. And that's something Alice Weidel got onto pretty quickly as well, which is the migration issue, which after all is the issue that made them big. But, we both listened to it. The first half hour, it was boring. I'm sorry. They really took a while.
You saw the listening numbers drop. Yeah.
You saw numbers drop and they really took a while to actually find a common kind of language. And I've known Alice Weidel pretty much from day one since she started in the AfD. She's refused many English language interviews to Deutsche Welle in the past. She does not do interviews because she says we're a German party. Clearly, this is making a point. They're very nation proud. And I've heard her speak English for the first time in at least 6 years now. And clearly, you can tell she's gone from an international businesswoman to someone who was actually struggling to find words in some places. I thought that was rather surprising.
And I think it's interesting, Kate, that you say that it was a fairly structured interview, or that you felt Elon Musk was well prepared because in our view, we agreed when we were listening together with our colleagues that it was very free-flowing or even unstructured. Like Michaela said, they did seem to be interested in each other, but didn't quite know where to go. So I've just written down a couple of topics that they touched. They started with the topic of energy, which went into some details where we also here at DW, we produced a fact check. There were a couple of things that were mentioned, like Germany being the first country that stopped nuclear power in Europe. That is simply not true. And for anybody who wants to read up on this, here at dw.com, we've produced that fact check, and we'll link to that also in the description on YouTube on this podcast. So that bit, the first 15 minutes to be spent on energy, is something everybody agrees that energy prices are too high, but Alice Weidel didn't really produce any solutions. They went then to bureaucracy, which was an interesting bit, I thought, because Elon Musk, of course, has a business in Germany. He has started his own Tesla plant outside of Berlin, and he described the amounts of paper that he had to print. And this is something that I can believe.
Yeah,
right?
He's at 25,000 pages for his Tesla factory. And at the same time, it's also a well-recognized political issue in this election campaign. On the 23rd of February, of course, we'll have elections here in Germany. And clamping down on bureaucracy is something that the current leader in the polls, Friedrich Merz, is also
from the Conservative Party.
From the Conservative CDU-CSU union, is also putting pretty much to the forefront. It's something he wants to tackle. So that really was, that was a serious issue, but it's interesting how it went from very intricate technical detail of whether using nuclear power really should have been the way ahead to a bigger sweeping issue in terms of what the key economic issues here in Germany are.
Yeah, and then they went over to immigration, but only touched on that. There was something about theft being legal in California. Now, this is something where we all know at some point the authorities there stopped essentially going after people who were making committing small crimes, but this still doesn't mean that theft is legal. Elon Musk asked Alice Weidel about her position on Israel. I thought that was interesting. They talked about Nazi Germany and about Hitler, about Ukraine, and then ended with Alice Weidel asking Musk about his planned trips to Mars. So, Kate, what did you learn about Alice Weidel from this chat?
I think one of the things that stood out to me is that they both have a very similar way of expressing themselves, down to their sense of humor, kind of this sort of a little bit awkward, jokey, sort of chronically online humor that they have to both of them. And I thought that was really interesting. It seemed very clear to me how these two people might get along and might find themselves aligned. And I think in other moments, you're right, they were sort of feeling each other out. I noticed that a lot in the energy conversation at the start. That's something that Musk has been very interested in for his businesses. And he jumped in very quickly to correct her. and say, no, we actually, we want to use solar energy, we want to use nuclear energy, and to kind of try to correct her and push back on some of her views there where it aligns with his business interests.
And of course, both of them share this viewpoint that you have to go against what they call the woke leftists, who have dominated world politics for too long, and certainly the Western world. So that is something where they almost portrayed themselves and each other as the only people who can save the entire system. And Alice Weidel actually made a joke about the bureaucrats in Brussels listening to this conversation. Maybe that is something that we can listen back to.
While we talk, 150 bureaucrats of the European Union are watching us, our conversation, to enforce this ridiculous Digital Services Act that is nothing else than a censorship on free speech. But free speech, right? It's
yes.
And you said it, free speech is a precondition of democracy. If you are not able to form a proper opinion and exchange opinions and ideas, and a democracy should be a competition of the best ideas, right? And of compromises.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
yes, exactly. Without freedom of speech, people are obviously not able to say what they want to say, and then they cannot make an informed vote. So if people are simply fed propaganda and have no access to what's really going on, then they can't make an informed vote, and then you don't have a real democracy.
So, Michaela, can you just tell us why did Alice Weidel make this link to the bureaucrats watching in Brussels? What is this dad that was?
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to emphasize, all of us would probably sign up to what these two people just said. Freedom of speech is a precondition, but what freedom of speech is up for is up for disposal, just as what fair trade was during the Trump 1 presidency. The Digital Services Act is in force here in the European Union. It requires fact-checking. It also requires some transparency when it comes to algorithms. And all these bureaucrats at the European Commission are currently looking into what has become a test case for the DSA, which is the Platform X here in Europe, its own conduct. And they're listening in very carefully this evening to see how and whether this conversation will be amplified, whether there will be any kind of fact-checking going into this or not, because there is a minimum requirement, but particularly how X handles this and whether it pushes this content beyond what is allowed under the Digital Services Act. And that's really where these two agree. A platform like X should be allowed to make its own rules. That's the definition of freedom of speech, and should be allowed to push its own content and select the content without any kind of factual checking. That is that definition of free speech. Europe's definition, the European Union's, is very different from that, and they are trying to portray that as censorship.
And we learned about before the conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel that actually the German Parliament's administration was going to listen in. So they were probably some of those bureaucrats that Alice Weidel also mentioned, to check whether there were going to be illegal statements made on this platform, because then they have the power and also the obligation to pass that on to the European Commission and request the Digital Services Act to be applied to this. Because, of course, we've got electoral rules here in this country. And the big concern by some NGOs was, OK, we've got a huge platform where, yes, they're independent. They can utter their own opinions on that platform. But we don't allow for illegal party donations, and we don't allow for illegal statements made.
Yeah, the big question here is whether legally this could become so important in offering a platform that it manifests or is equal to an illegal donation, if it can be expressed in monetary terms, in terms of extra outreach that it might have given Alice Weidel. But again, there the question will be, is this just freedom of speech? First Amendment, the US interpretation of it, but of course it won't be according to US law, it will be according to German and European law. Or is this unjust interference? And that will be established in a court of law, potentially, if there's. But the jury amongst European leaders has already come out on this. The German chancellor says, well, we should just remain cool over Elon Musk's comments. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, sees clear interference here. In fact, so does leader of the opposition, Friedrich Merz, who could soon become the next chancellor just within a matter of weeks, because his conservative bloc is leading in the polls. So this is widely generally seen as by critics as election interference, and will continue to be billed as the purest form of free speech, both by the AfD and also by Elon Musk, of course, who has his own business interests in being allowed to use his platform as he chooses here in the European Union. And I just want to add that Ursula von der Leyen, when this Digital Services Act came through,
European Commission President,
yes, she actually spoke of Europe potentially becoming an exporter of regulation on the digital sphere. And I think this didn't age well, the statement at all, because quite clearly, looking at the United States right now, that is simply not on the cards.
And Kate, I want to bring you back in because, of course, you have got a very good understanding of how those tech platforms work. So when Elon Musk speaks of his platforms offering free speech, he's still the man who creates the algorithms of those platforms that decide what content gets seen by whom, right? So how far does free speech go on X?
Yeah, it's something that he's always paid lip service to, but we've seen time and again where he hasn't really followed through with that promise of sort of absolutist free speech. Shortly after he took over the platform, he banned journalists and other accounts that had reported on the location of his jet, which is public information, and he banned folks for sharing that. He did the same thing again recently when a journalist publicized the Adrian Dittman account, which was an account that many people believed was one of Elon's parody accounts or an alternative account that he would use. And he banned reporters for sharing information about that account and claimed that it was sharing personal information. So we've seen him kind of jump in and interfere and ban people from the platform when they're saying things that he doesn't like, which kind of runs counter to this idea of free speech that he's always espoused, right? That anyone can say anything. Well, there is actually a line, and it's when you've upset him or said something that he didn't want shared online. And that is when he will step in and take action. You also mentioned, the algorithmic boost that these accounts are getting. And Musk's account is the biggest on the platform by far. He has the most reach, the largest following. And so when he hosts a live conversation like this, that's pushed out to all of his followers, and it is boosted. Many of the things that he posts about throughout the day end up trending on X. And so his account has an enormous amount of influence over the broader conversation on that platform. And he is giving a very big leg up to the AfD by sharing his account and his presence with them.
So why does he do that? Why the AfD for Elon?
I think there's a lot of political alignment for Elon. He is, like we said earlier, shifted increasingly to the right. He has always been very strongly anti-immigration, and I think he has that overlap. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about the Digital Services Act. Now that Trump is coming into office in the United States, there's not a lot of regulatory pressure on Elon Musk. So that regulatory pressure is coming from Europe, and that is really where he's facing legal challenges now. And so I think finding toeholds in European governments is going to help him push back on that.
And he is wearing those three hats: the businessman, the media guy, and also Donald Trump's political advisor. So sometimes you would think, is he out to gain even more power in all the fields? I mean, is he trying to push his own ideology through various fields? Business doesn't seem to be enough for him, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's really become convinced of what he calls the woke mind virus, and that is infecting society. He said that in the conversation earlier. how that has really become a problem in Germany as well. And I think he sees it as an ideological mission to push back on that and to reintroduce conservative values and policies to countries that have shifted to the left.
And when we talk about ideology, he did seem in this chat with Alice Weidel to be fairly concerned about the party's far-right image and wanted to hear from Alice Weidel herself, please tell me that you're not Nazis. Let's listen back to that.
There's a lot of the media wants to portray AfD as far-right, as somehow associated with Nazism or something like that. Perhaps you could address that concern, because people, when they hear sort of right wing in Germany, they naturally have a bit of a negative reaction.
Yes, thank you for the question. First of all, I would like to, since I'm a economist, I would like to shed some light on the idea, when we talk about Hitler, on the idea of the National Socialists. Back then, during the Third Reich, the National Socialists, as the word says, they were socialists. Adolf Hitler considered,
so.
Yeah,
They nationalized industries like crazy.
Yes, absolutely. He was a communist, and he considered himself as a socialist. So what they did, they state funded then the private companies, and then they asked for taxes, huge taxes, and then also wait a second, I need to ask the word now, verstaatlichen.
Nationalize.
Yeah, nationalize the entire industry. Yeah, you said that before, and the biggest success after that terrible era in our history was to label Adolf Hitler as right and conservative. He was exactly the opposite. He wasn't a conservative. He wasn't a libertarian. He was a communist, socialist guy. So, full stop. No more comment on that. And we are exactly the opposite. We are a libertarian, conservative party.
So Alice Weidel distancing herself from Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. Michaela, she called Adolf Hitler essentially far left.
Yes, and she does protest a bit too much when she's talking about the AfD unfairly being framed to the right. I think she would struggle to find any historian, even on X, who will back her up on this theory, which is adventurous to say the very least. Communism was about a class war. The Nazis were all about race, the classification of people into race. And that was the core ideology to start from. You can read many books on this. There are many people who are experts in this field that there were certain structural similarities, but from this, the starting point is a very, very different one. So off the scale, just a walk, what she was saying. What is necessary to really add to her response when Elon Musk asked her, please tell me you're not far right, you're not extreme right, is that the AfD as a whole actually lost an appeal to prevent it to be treated as a suspicious case in terms of it potentially being far right and potentially being anti-democratic. A court of law here in Germany ruled there simply are too many indicators suggesting that this requires more in-depth analysis.
And this is something where, because we're often accused, as DW as well, to use those labels too easily. But these are classifications by German authorities that look into pieces.
By court of law, actually, more importantly, because they've been checked in courts. They've been tested in courts here as well.
Exactly. But, even if the party and some chapters of it are under surveillance by the authorities to find out more evidence. And this is something where you can say they do that if they've got a hint of an idea that this party is aiming to undermine the democratic system, go against the constitution that we've all agreed is a constitution that gives people democratic rights across the board.
Yes, and it's already labeled extreme right in Thuringia. The leader in that particular state can be legally called a fascist because he himself as a history teacher used a phrase that the Nazis used, and I quote, everything for Germany that was used by extreme forces of the Nazis, the SS. So that there are these conscious,
they're testing their limits,
yeah, there's
right?
testing and there's this conscious signaling to reach people, to reach supporters in the far right and extreme right corner. And but I also want to add, Alice Weidel has come a long way with the Alternative for Germany, with her own party, because she at one point tried to exclude Björn Höcke from the party, and now essentially she's aligned with him and she teams up with him, as the AfD has been able to establish itself as currently in the polls, the second strongest force in Germany.
And of course, she is the moderate representative. I mean, Kate, I don't think you got the impression that there was somebody there who was going to, yell out far-right extremists' slogans, right? So Alice Weidel is somebody where the AfD can obviously say this is a lesbian businesswoman from Switzerland and she doesn't fulfill the stereotypes, or
well, she's not from there. She lives and she's registered in Germany. So she claims to not live in Switzerland.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's a talking point that Musk has latched onto when he's spoken about her publicly, right? But I think, when he's offering her the opportunity to defend herself against these allegations of being extreme right, it's something that he's wanted to be afforded to himself as well. He has gotten in trouble in the US for essentially endorsing the Great Replacement theory on X, which caused a mass advertiser exodus, and he was eventually forced to apologize for. But he's also kind of towed that line of sharing extreme content, sharing anti-Semitic content, and then having to walk it back. And so, when I hear him giving her an open floor to discuss that, it's something that he's kind of wanted for himself as well. And he's felt like he's made those kinds of comments and they've been misinterpreted or taken the wrong way, and it's harmed his businesses. So I see an echo of his own behavior in the platform in that.
And I just want to add that our colleagues Richard and Matt did an episode of Berlin Briefing on the AfD. So if you want to hear more about the party itself and how it's developed from this Eurosceptic party to a party that is in parts officially labeled right-wing extremist, do check it out on Berlin Briefing. That's dw.com. Berlin Briefing, we'll post it in the description. But Kate, I want to ask you, isn't this what Elon Musk and Alice Weidel did in this chat? Talking about labels like that, are you Nazis? And it's wrong to call you far right, and we're libertarian. We have nothing to do with right-wing extremism. What is the strategy behind essentially calling into question all the labels that we've been using to classify political ideologies and movements?
Yeah, I think it's something that Musk spends a lot of time engaging with and kind of shifting the rules around speech, shifting the ground. And, he's kind of towed this line himself, right, where he says something extreme and then has to walk it back. And then later will say it again and kind of test the water and see if that's something that he can get away with. So, it's a sort of a game that he's often played. But you also, I think, can kind of see his hypocrisy around free speech when he talks about these things, right? Like, he can get on X Spaces and say whatever he likes, but if someone uses a particular label to describe him or to describe another politician, that needs to be pushed back on, that needs to be challenged, and it's, again, returning to this idea of free speech for me, but not for thee.
And something that came up very clearly was that they tried to avoid discussing those ideological questions, I thought. I mean, if you look at this conversation, they didn't spend a lot of time on immigration. They spent a lot of time talking about energy. Elon asked Alice Weidel towards the end, what would you like to talk about? And she asked him about his philosophies of why do you want to go to Mars, what's in there for you. But they also talked about Ukraine and Donald Trump's claim that he can end the war really quickly. And that is something that I'd also like to listen back to with you.
The longer this conflict goes on, the more Ukraine weakens relative to Russia. I mean, Ukraine is a much smaller country. It simply cannot afford the losses relative to Russia. Russia has, it's just, it's, this is the longer this drags on, the worse it is for Ukraine. And then you've got all these poor, men dying and for nothing. Why? I hope this terrible conflict can be resolved quickly, and I think it will be under President Trump.
Yeah, and what people in the States, I'm not sure that they know that the AfD is a political party that is very interested in essentially re-establishing ties with Russia again. I mean, they both talked about this conflict, having to end it because they want to prevent more losses of life. And of course, again, this is something where everybody agrees, right? That conflict does have to end. It's a war, an illegal war started by Russia where they've invaded Ukraine. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk are now saying we need to end this conflict because we need to prevent loss of life.
Yes, that's where they are aligned. And I guess we would agree that that conflict should come to an end. And at the same time, I think it's worth noting that the far-right Alternative for Germany here in Germany and Elon Musk only aligned in individual points here. Mm-hmm. I think this was more also a question of leadership that Alice Weidel was asking, and Elon Musk said, well, this is something that Donald Trump will have to decide how he ends this war. But at the same time, the Alternative for Germany has been very critical of Germany no longer receiving gas from Russia, and actually in its party program wants to have more trade with the Eurasia group, which essentially means stretching out towards Moscow again in terms of your
China,
orientation. Yeah, there's an inherent
projects.
criticism of reliance, both economic but also overall strategic reliance on the United States as a trade partner, but also for security. I want to come back to the beginning almost, because I doubt that Elon Musk is that interested in Germany. I can hear and see in his actions an interest in creating insecurity and distortion and disruption here in the European Union. And I dare say that he thinks in much bigger units. To him, for X, national borders are an obstacle. A different regulation is an obstacle to doing business in all of the fields that he's engaged in. So while he has Starlink on the ground serving the Ukrainian army, he's at the same time rhetorically now saying it has to come to an end. It's, Ukraine essentially can't take it anymore. And actually, there are indications that Russia is under a lot of pressure as well. So I'd also actually like to throw the question back, what is the thinking of Elon Musk if he thinks of he doesn't want more national territories and more different units of regulation, whereas Alice Weidel is someone who she no longer wants the European Union as it exists. She wants smaller units. She wants a Europe of national states. So there are huge areas, big elephants in the room that they will actually, I doubt, ever have an exchange about.
Kate, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of areas where Musk's politics are somewhat murky, and I think Ukraine is absolutely one of them. He's used it almost as a marketing tactic for Starlink to say, look how well Starlink performs in the battlefield, look what we're able to do. He's also been really critical of the U.S. aid to Ukraine and said that is, an example of waste that the government should pare back upon. And so, I think he makes these sorts of political alliances when and where they're convenient, but, helping one of his businesses may end up harming another. We also have seen him fall out a number of times very publicly with people he's aligned himself with in the past. And that may be something that we see here too, and that we may even see between him and Donald Trump as we move forward.
And Kate, can I just ask you perhaps to sum up, what did you take away from this conversation with Alice Weidel?
That's a good question. I think, you really see Musk continuing to want to establish himself as a political player. This is a landscape that he, until very recently, didn't want to touch, and he didn't want to be too involved in politics. He then went all in on the Donald Trump campaign. And now I think is sort of casting around the world looking for other political arenas that he can fight in, and, really gravitating towards leaders who accept him and welcome him and who are willing to promote and boost his businesses to come onto X and let X play a central role in the public debate. That's really important to him. He wants X to maintain its relevancy.
And one thing is clear that, of course, Alice Weidel has benefited tremendously from Elon Musk's support. I'm not just saying this. We actually have a graph that we can maybe pull up if you could find it, and then we'll show you. And for those of us listening, or those of you listening to this podcast, we're showing the average impressions of social media posts on Instagram and X by politicians here in Germany, in the German parliament, and we have a comparison between the last 2 weeks, so essentially since Elon Musk said that only the AfD can save Germany, from the 24th of December last year to essentially this week, we see that Alice Weidel's average impressions reach about 1 million. That's 1 million impressions. All the other politicians are roughly around 300,000 or so. And when you compare that to the figures from last year, Alice Weidel was no exception. She was also ranking between,
200,000, something like that, yeah.
Something like that, average impressions. And this is crazily high, this reach for Alice Weidel now, since Elon Musk has said, hey, let's hang out together. But how did she do? I mean, Michaela, what is your assessment? Did this help her? I mean, how did she perform?
Actually, I was a bit disappointed, frankly, because clearly they were sounding each other out for a very, very long period of time. So anyone who wants to listen, you can skip the first 20 minutes for sure. We've just seen a fresh poll come out since this engagement with Elon Musk, and her AfD party has increased by 1%. At the same time, the issues that Germans care about in these elections, their migration is shot up by 14% all of a sudden.
It's overtaken the economy.
Yeah, so it's really going her way. And at the same time, we don't really see that in percentage points. Then again, we all know the reservations about polling. Time and time again, it gets disproven as really being the sole indicator to go by.
And also the others are trying to be strong on migration, and they don't want to hand this topic over to the AfD alone.
So we'll only learn on the 23rd of February whether this has really helped. We also see polling from people saying, from pollsters here in Germany, the same ones who did this fresh poll today, saying that their impression is that the AfD, her party, the far-right Alternative for Germany, will max out around 20, at maximum 25% in terms of potential they can tap into in terms of voters here in Germany. So they are heading towards that territory anyway. But at the same time,
and no other party wants to go into a coalition with them.
They will definitely not be in government.
Definitely
that is for sure.
not.
No other party will go into a coalition with them. But it has elevated her to a completely different level. She's been on so many people's lips, and that just shows the power of celebrity of Elon Musk. And both, I think, have very successfully once again blurred the line between freedom of speech, which essentially is freedom of having your own opinion and expressing it, and the freedom of facts. They deliberately blur that line completely here.
And speaking of that, Kate, you're probably also monitoring another big player in Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, this is news that is fresh this week as well, that he doesn't believe in fact-checking anymore. So what do you expect is going to happen there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Mark Zuckerberg has said is that he thinks Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, can copy the approach Elon Musk has taken with X and allow users to fact check and to kind of step back from responsibility for what's being said on the platform. We talked earlier about the Digital Services Act, and I don't know if the European Union will agree with that approach. It's kind of running counter to what they've asked these big tech companies to do in terms of checking misinformation that's spreading on their platforms. I think the other thing to note, is that X is essentially a public platform. So we can go on and see a post and say, oh, that's not true. It needs a fact check. Facebook is not like that. It's all of these little walled gardens, these private Facebook groups, these, closed communities where we've seen time and time again that misinformation runs wild, whether that's about elections or vaccines or the pandemic. A lot of that misinformation has started and spread in these private groups. And you really have to wonder if private groups can be left to fact check themselves, because those are not public posts that anyone can come in and say, oh, there's a mistake here, or take a look at this study. It's groups that are kind of self-enforcing and reinforcing their beliefs.
So from your professional point of view, is it time to panic for traditional journalists working for traditional media companies like us, like yourself, or should we just take it with a pinch of salt and say, OK, this is just the next development and we have to live with the fact that the media landscape is moving on and Elon Musk is powerful, yes, but, will still prevail?
I think that there has, for a long time, been a degradation of trust in the traditional media. And I think it's a problem that we've always had to grapple with. Especially as Musk and others sort of promote, alternative set of facts, alternative truths. I hope that people will see that and want to seek out, more unbiased and sturdy sources of truth. But I think that we as the media have to make the case for why the information that we're putting out there is trustworthy and why people should seek it out and not allow themselves to be misled online.
Yeah, and I think this is the right point to say again to everybody commenting in under our YouTube videos that we do indeed talk to the AfD just as we do to the other parties. You'll find our documentary on the AfD and its foreign policy issues in the YouTube descriptions. We talked to Alice Weidel about that in German, but also to our foreign politics spokesperson. So, Michaela, any last thoughts on this conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel?
Yes, I just want to add one more thought, and that's this is an overture to Elon Musk and also Mark Zuckerberg clearly going after the EU regulation. And how much clout Elon Musk has with Donald Trump will become apparent when we see how far he gets Donald Trump to strong arm the European Union to change its course on regulating social media, these social media companies. And there's another litmus test really as well. The Cybertruck is not on European roads. Why? Because it simply doesn't fulfill a lot of, and there are many, there's a lot of bureaucracy, but there's also a lot of security requirements here in Europe. If within the European Union you see a Cybertruck driving around in the next couple of years, Elon Musk has won.
Yeah, or a rocket to Mars.
That bit was interesting.
Absolutely. And I want to talk more about going to Mars, seriously, and learn about, do you believe in God? Is there any proof of alien existence in space, etc.? But yeah. So, Kate, any last thoughts on this conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating to see the way that Musk continues to use this platform to sort of build his own media empire, and host these kinds of interviews. He's always really criticized the media and been really unhappy with the way that he's portrayed in it. And I think it's really interesting to see him kind of try to create an alternative source of truth. And, he says it over and over again on the platform, telling users, you are the media now. And I think he's starting to try to play that role a little bit himself in hosting these kinds of interviews.
All right. Well, I think plenty more to talk about as usual, but we'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure that we'll talk again about the role of traditional media versus the so-called social media. And you can listen back to this episode, of course, on all major podcast platforms. You can also find us on YouTube and on our own website, dw.com. Berlin Briefing, leave us a comment, subscribe to us. We've got a newsletter on all things German politics or the German view on things happening worldwide. That comes out every Tuesday, so make sure you subscribe. And until then, thanks for watching and listening.